Deputy President. Now, I mean, wow, and I don't think Senator Thorpe will be upset with me for saying this, but I do think that Satan might be scheming to work today, because I'm not quite sure anyone thought Senator Thorpe and I would ever be on a unity ticket. Yet here we are. Unbelievable. And the contribution that we just heard from the ALP, it just sort of reinforced, though. I actually caught up with someone not long ago who is a Voice supporter. But the point that they made to me in complete exasperation was that every time a Yes supporter opens their mouth, they actually push more people to the no vote. And I certainly think, and Senator Thorpe used the term, so I hope she doesn't mind me adopting it, the white-splaining we heard in condemnation of this motion and amendment put up by 3 Indigenous women, and their motives being impugned, their reasons for doing this were somehow ill-conceived, that perhaps if they actually took the time to think about it and present it differently, that the ALP may grant these Indigenous women with the grace of supporting their motion. But I mean, we know that that will never happen, because we know, and Senator Liddle and Senator Nampijinpa, not only are they the wrong kind of women because they're Conservative women, but they're the wrong kind of Indigenous women. And we know that they're the wrong kind of voice. And they've been joined today, being brought in together in a group with Senator Thorpe as the wrong kind of Indigenous voice, trying to push for integrity and transparency. And I mean, does anyone else remember the federal election campaign when this was a government that was promising integrity and transparency? That was, one of their bases. We are going to be, full of integrity when we make our decisions, and how we make those decisions is going to be transparent. And, I mean, it's like the $275 we were going to get off our energy bill. It was clearly just a slogan and rhetoric. It had no meaning for them, because from the second this government came to be, they have done nothing but show a complete lack of integrity and have done everything they can to absolutely hide the basis of their decisions and dirty deals, and absolutely demonstrate a complete lack of transparency. But I think, to Senator Liddle's point, when she was speaking, it is absolutely time that Minister Burney stand up and take responsibility. If I hear once more Minister Burney standing up almost in floods of tears that we need the voice because we've got to close the gap, that all of these things are so terrible, well, what are you doing today, Minister Burney? What have you been doing in the 16 months since you've got in? Absolutely nothing to improve the lives of Indigenous people. Absolutely nothing to actually oversee any of these organisations and make sure they're delivering outcomes. Minister Burney, this is absolutely criminally culpable. If you know that there are things that need to be reformed and things that need to be done, but you're sitting on your hands saying you can't do anything unless there's a voice vote that passes as a yes. That is absolutely criminal. If you know that there's things to be done, Minister Burney, do them today and start getting on with the work, because we know that there are Indigenous organisations, such as land councils, that are failing to comply with what would be basic governance standards. So how can this, and again, pushing yes voters into the no camp, how can anyone have any trust in this voice proposal? How can there be any basis of truth that this is a modest change, as we've heard, which we know is a fallacy, but how can there be any trust with the Australian people that the voice will not just be in our constitution a repeat of ATSI? Because we don't know. And we've now heard that they're going, those opposite, buddying up with the Greens, are going to oppose any examination into the thousands of Indigenous groups that we know that are failing when it comes to governance. It is absolutely extraordinary. Now, I just did also hear Senator Thorpe mention the Central Land Council and the audit report. So I've actually got a just quick snapshot of it here. And what was interesting was when the Audit Council has come back on what they've found, with regards to instruments of delegation and how authorisations occurred, they could be improved, and there's a lack of clarity as to whether the accountable authority can even delegate. So we need a bit of an improvement there. But what we do know, which I think is even more damning, that the CLC's arrangements and in their proper use and management of resources. Now, keep in mind, when we talk about their resources, we're talking about $80.2 million. We're not talking about a couple of $100 grand. We're not talking about a small drop of change. We're talking about $80.2 million in 21-22. So pretty sure we can assume that's gone up a bit. So this was distributed to traditional landholders, but who was it distributed to? How do we know who received that money? And what the Audit Committee found, the Auditor General report found, that except for arrangements to manage risk of fraud and conflicts of interest, so their arrangements were in some ways largely appropriate, except for arrangements to manage risk of fraud and conflicts of interest. Now, I would have thought, and in fact, what was alluded to by Senator Pratt when she referred to family members and actually withdrew that because the inference was being clearly made towards another senator. But when she made that inference, was she making the inference under the understanding that managing risk of fraud and conflicts of interest were some of those conflicts of interest because she knows what those conflicts of interest are? She is aware that $80.2 million is not necessarily being distributed to who it should be distributed to, but who it deems it might like to distribute it to. But we don't know because we can't get to the bottom of this, even though the Auditor General reports come back saying that it's not up to spec. Those opposite, remember, integrity, transparency, those things that went out the window with the $275 on our electricity bills, absolutely went out the window because they don't want transparency and integrity when it comes to how the Central Land Council gets to distribute $80.2 million. $80.2 million, and I can promise you it's not going to the Indigenous people that it should be going to. And everybody knows that. And in fact, it's absolutely insincere from anyone in this place to say that they think, hand on heart, that money is being distributed in the way it should be 100% of the time. I'd say even maybe 90% of the time, maybe 60% of the time. I don't know, Senator Liddle, what do we reckon through you, Chair? Maybe 10% of the time? Who would know? Who would know? And this from an Indigenous-Australian. Who doesn't know? Who doesn't know? But don't worry, we've got Senator Pratt that can white-splain to us that you and Senator Nampijinpa and Senator Thorpe are incorrect in putting forward any sort of reference to look at these organisations. Well, you weren't white-splained to. The white-splaining was done over this side. Order. Well, I'm explaining to you what your colleague said, Senator Stewart, and look, you know, I got to say, I've been mansplained this time a whole lot of times. Well, you know, I'm supporting my colleagues and my Indigenous Australian women that are consistently, they are absolutely denigrated, and those opposite. I mean, do we remember at question time the other day? I think it was you, Senator Liddle, or was it Senator Price that asked a question, which was followed very quickly by a question from Senator De Coney, of which Senator Wong responded, "Isn't it nice to see someone who's got a genuine interest in Indigenous affairs?" I mean, what an insult. We have Senator Wong suggesting that a white man has more interest in Indigenous affairs than an Indigenous senator. What a disgrace. But that just shows the absolute contempt that those opposite have. And I think as we see the no voting increasing and we see the yes voting going down.
Order.
And I would like to
Senator
thank
Pratt.
you all for the contribution you make to the way that those polls are going, because every time you dismiss Senator Nampijinpa or Senator Liddle and you diminish the roles of the Indigenous voices that you don't like, it actually just helps boost those in the no camp, but also brings people across to the no camp because they know that this will be just an absolute stitch-up by the Labor Party. And Senator Thorpe was right, the people that agree with it. The people that will make sure that the rorts and the handouts and the scams absolutely continue because they don't want transparency, they don't want good governance. Imagine if we had good governance in the unions. Imagine how that'd go. Jeez Louise, that'd be fun. I think everyone would be busy for years on that. But look, Senator Liddle, Senator Nampijinpa, I commend you for bringing this motion, and I would actually urge all members who claim that it's important that we have Indigenous voices, that we hear the Indigenous voice, that we hear from Indigenous voices in the community that understand what's happening at the coal face, that need to tell us what we want, that you should support this motion.